Hello, everyone. Welcome to Comic-Con in beautiful San Diego. I'm Emily Chung from the Fleet Science Center in beautiful Balboa Park. As San Diego's Science Center, it's our mission to connect everyone in San Diego and beyond to the power and possibilities of science. The Fleet also works with communities across San Diego to leverage STEM and STEM learning to advance their goals and aspirations. We're excited to be here today with this inspiring group of scientist panelists for Miss Marvel and the Power of Representation. They're going to discuss how diversity, identity, and representation can extend beyond our favorite stories and into our lives and careers. In fact, two of the panelists today are featured in the Fleet's New Science exhibition, which you can see both at the museum in Balboa Park and at the San Diego Central Library. New Science highlights queer and intersectional identities in STEM with two M's, math and medicine, and how they're revolutionizing science. If that's not enough, we also have 5 badass female scientists from the If Then initiative on our panel. As If Then ambassadors, they're dedicated to advancing women innovators in STEM and inspiring the next generation of girls. The If Then initiative is an effort by the Association of Science and Technology Centers and funded by Lita Hill Philanthropies. So today we have a lot of panelists for you, and let's meet them. First we have Shantae Summers. Shantae is a Black queer woman who's passionate about impacting her community through her work in oncology and connecting to youth in underrepresented spaces. As a medicinal synthetic chemist, she works to make small molecule compounds that are screened for anti-cancer properties, and she enjoys writing, poetry, climbing, and backpacking in her free time. Next, we have Chris Garza, one of our featured in our New Science exhibit. Chris is finishing dual doctoral degrees in medicine and biophysics, studying HIV using computer modeling. He identifies as trans, queer, and half Native American, and is an advocate for mental health and survivors of trauma. We have Anila Madaraju. Anila is a passionate scientist who's dedicated her career to researching and developing novel, effective therapies to fight diseases like type 2 diabetes and cancer, while also sharing her love of science and encouraging scientific curiosity in the community. We have Sydney Hamilton, who is not here to change the world, she's here to change the galaxy. Her passion for STEM advocacy in the aerospace industry and her interest in sustainability are showcased in her work leading the first experiment plane, also known as an X-plane, focused on sustainability. We have Kay Savage, who is a data-driven researcher with a passion for telling stories with numbers, and by harnessing the power of statistics and data visualization, she uses a mixed methods research approach to provide an analytical perspective on our constantly changing, increasingly complex world. Kay's career has taken her from Nashville to New York, and she now works for Fanatics, leading a team of data scientists to analyze data and gain a deeper understanding of fan behavior. We have Jeevan Kohli, a neuroscientist and clinical psychologist who uses neuroimaging to study links between the brain and behavior across a variety of neurodevelopmental and neurological conditions. He's known as the bisexual, bearded, baking brain scientist and is passionate about visibility, equity, and advocacy in science and beyond. Last, we have Jasmine Joestar, a scientist currently working in the biotech industry and pursuing drug product and research into cancer therapy. She loves to create content around comics, anime, and gaming while highlighting diversity and representation for Middle Eastern and Muslim people. All right, and then we're waiting on one more panelist. She'll show up when she shows up. So for now, we can just get into the questions. So what about Miss Marvel hit home for everybody?
It's the first Muslim superhero in the MCU.
I'll expand on that and say there's a lot to relate to in terms of South Asian culture. One of the things that really stuck with me was the idea that everybody's family has a partition story. That's certainly something that I felt as a child of immigrants from India.
Yeah, I'd like to add on that, Jeevan. I am of Indian origin, and I think that we grew up with these stories, and it was just really nice to see that they tried to tie in that history, which we bring with us even when we're two-culture kids in other parts of the world. I was raised in Canada, and then I came out here as an immigrant as well. So we were talking about intersectionality, and it was just really nice to see that even today, young South Asians are still remembering that history, and we're trying to work with it, and it is a big part of our identity.
I think it was cool to be welcomed into someone else's home, if you will. I think I haven't always been able to really live in somebody else's world or in someone else's culture. So I studied abroad when I was in college, and you realize that there are all these stories and untold things that are happening that really show and build someone. So to be able to be invited into the Southeast Asian culture was really great to see. And I learned a lot, I loved how it was woven into so beautifully. And so I thought it was a really great depiction.
And then we do have our last panelist here now, B. Mendez-Gandisa. She's a passionate engineer working on ensuring the next generation of underrepresented students know the opportunities that a STEM education can bring for them and their communities. The question when we were walking in was, what about Miss Marvel hit home for you?
For me, it's like at the beginning, she doesn't think that she has any power, and then she finds it, right? But when she finds it, she can't control it. And I think all of us, inside of us, we have some sort of power, whatever that is. And I think me being Latina, I'm from Venezuela, working in tech and trying to get more people of color to come into tech, I think sometimes when you see someone that looks like you, then you can do it. And so I feel like this power, even though it's non-existent, that when the next generation can see that someone that looks like them or speaks like them or eats like them can make it into tech too, it's important. That's what hit home, right? And at the beginning, you don't know. When I got into tech, I was the only Latina engineer in the room. And so it's like, okay, it's my job to bring more. And not just about the Latino, to me, it's like every color of the rainbow has to be represented. That to me is super important. And so that's what I do, but that's what hit home. It's like we all have a power. Once we discover what that power is within us, is how do we embrace it and control it, not in a way that you're showing off, but in a way that how do you bring more to the same trip with you.
Chris, do you want to talk about kind of how, in what ways stories like Miss Marvel or others that highlight diverse identities can reach outside of pop culture and entertainment into STEM and the real-life consequences of like diverse storytelling?
I actually was thinking, and onto the story itself. I think one of the things that popped out to me at first was that she doesn't see anybody that she can look up to, and her parents aren't really encouraging her to either. And that's something that I think is difficult when you have these boundaries between cultures and there's a misunderstanding about what it means and what does Comic-Con mean? What are these events do. And I think it's really important to make sure that there's representation to show that this is an important thing. It's a way for people to connect and tell stories, and I think beyond events like this into sort of everyday life, I think it's important to be able to see people ahead of you, to have heroes to look up to who you identify with, that you can see yourself and see that it's possible, right? Is that somebody with my history, my background, my whatever, could make this work, rather than seeing people who, maybe their life was just different, right? And there's something that you'll never be able to cross the boundary into. I think that's one of the things that it strikes me is it's improving, and I'm happy to see it. Want to see more.
And there is a tagline for the If Then organization that we're with, and it's if she can see it, she can be it. And that extends much past getting women in STEM, but also kids understanding that they can be superheroes, that they can be creative, that they can be represented in a space. And the alternative side of that is what you miss when you don't see yourself, what you miss in being inspired, being felt like someone can empower you or lift you up. So it is so important to have these folks up here that you can look up to, that you can say, I can do that too. And they look like me, and they have a similar story to me, or they have something that I want to learn from and grow with. So I was very happy to see this show as the start of what I think could be like a really amazing universe for Ms. Marvel.
I think also like that idea that the things on the screen have to stay on a screen, you know, and we draw from what we consume. And when it's on the screen, you consume that media in a way that either obstructs your path or clears a path. And so I think the question I often ask myself is, by telling my story or not telling my story, who am I helping to clear the path and who am I obstructing? And so as a Black queer woman, that's my story. And by telling that on the screen, people can see it and then reflect back. Like, as simple as, I don't know how many people in this room have children, but my friends that have young children, like, they often watch a show like about Bluey. It's a little, yeah, so, but they use that show often to be like, what does Bluey do? Oh, we breathe, we do these things, and it integrates into their home and in their life, and then they can reflect back. So, you know, as an adult, we can also look back at a screen and be like, oh, well, what did this person do in this moment? And thinking ahead that they could overcome this obstacle, and I relate to that person, so I can overcome that obstacle. And so I do think it is a really easy transition to off-screen, real-life situations where we can harvest that energy and propel forward for whatever it is that you want to do. And I think the other thing that I really loved from watching Ms. Marvel was the drawing of community. And so, you know, at first we see her family that isn't really on board, they're kind of in the dark, they don't really know, and then over time her friends and her parents come beside her and they remind her that she is part of a community that is going to stand by her side and support her in all of the ways, because we can't do it all alone. Like, there's so many things that we need to delegate and ask for help with, and it's really beautiful to see that part of the story too, to remind us that we've got people who are here for us.
I really love that you brought that up. So growing up from Indian culture and Indian background, I really identified with the sort of contention between the main character and her mom, because I have a really, really strong and incredible mother, and we butt heads all the time. So now as I get older, I'm starting to become more understanding of where she came from, and that's literally what happens in this show. Like, it seems like they're fighting each other, they're at odds. Kamala always feels like maybe she's not being appreciated, her powers are just being restricted. She wants to go out and make her mark in the world, and it seems like her mom is trying to prevent her from doing that, but the truth is, it's coming from a place of love. It's like trying to say, like, apply these powers in a way that is going to help your community and that is not going to endanger you. But the dynamic does evolve from both ends, and it's just great from a South Asian perspective to Maybe as a future parent, when you see how the mom responds and eventually accepts and says, hey, there are some things I need to reverse course on, and I also need to change the way I look at you, because now you're coming into your adulthood, you're finding your place in the world. So it's a template. It's a template for families who are from other countries who are trying to deal with a different culture here. They see their children growing up in a different world, and we need to work from both ends to see, sort of meet in the middle and see how this person is becoming who they're going to be in this new context. So that was a really nice thing to see in this show too.
Yeah, definitely discussing, like, talking about the importance of family, community. Going off of that, what's the significance of using the power of representation and visibility in storytelling to lift up marginalized communities?
I'll jump off. So I love storytelling. I do it a lot when I write poetry. So on the side, by day, I'm a chemist. I work in a lab, and that's often in a very white, older space. And so I don't always connect with those people. And so a lot of my time outside of that, I want to connect with myself and the community that I'm a part of. And so I do poetry slam on the side and spoken word, and I'm actually going to wrap it into some of the talks that I'm giving throughout this weekend. But that is storytelling. It's a way to communicate something in a broader audience, and it uses allegories and similes, and people connect with that. Like, we are wired to write stories. So if we wake up in the day and we often don't see ourselves, the story we tell ourselves is usually negative, and that negative self-talk just, it goes day in and day out, and it digs into you. And so when we begin to tell ourselves a more positive story of growth and connecting with people and things that we can do every day, like, that story is rewritten in ourselves, and our brain rewires to write a much better story. And so when it comes to diversity and representation, I'm a big proponent of inclusion. I think the last 4 years has been a lot about diversity. And so now that we have the numbers in, work settings, what are we doing to include them? What stories can we be telling that combats, those biases that are inherently there? Like, as a Black woman, I'm often criticized more than my counterparts, and that's because of a story that's being told and their own bias. And so I like to come to work and have the opportunity to show up as my full self. So I talk about the poetry I do. I talk about maybe going to Pride last weekend so that they can begin to see me as a full person and build a different story than what they've already been told from generations and family and what's on the news and stuff, so that when they approach me, they've written a different story, and then they can begin to interact with me in a more positive way, and I can also interact with them in a positive way. I'm less on guard. I'm not thinking like how they're criticizing me or, et cetera, that my biases are there too. So I think storytelling is really, really powerful, and it can start with you just telling your story to your friend, to your neighbor, and slowly building that over time, and maybe becoming one of these people and being on panels and talking and telling your story. Like, it's so powerful to tell your story. So please, please do it.
And to add to that, storytelling is the oldest form of connection. It is why the sky moves. It's why the stars are moving. It's how you can learn fables and morals as a child. And so the types of stories that you tell and how you tell them will affect those communications and that relationship that you have with that story, with that understanding. So to have that diverse, not just opinion, but story of background, of experiences, will only help everyone else relate in a slightly different way to different situations that you're in now. So that's why I think it is so important, not just to have your story told, but listen to other people's, see what's relatable, see what's not, see what you can learn from, see how you can create that connection. And it's all from storytelling. It is definitely, as you said, human nature. We want to tell stories, we want to talk, we want to tell about the thing we learned last week, or what we've learned, why the stars are moving, and what that chasing scene is, I don't know. So it's great to be able to have those differences and ways to continue to learn and pull those connections and form them differently.
Yeah, and every culture has told stories for their entire existence. That is something that every culture, hands down, has in common. That, and probably like congregating around food. Like, but it's important because I think we have a ton of people in the room today, which is incredible, and you are all watching each one of us speak. However, because of your experiences, every single one of you will take away something different. When you retell this to someone else, you're going to have a slightly different twist than even if you're in here and you have a twin, you too will see it differently because you're looking at it from a slight angle. This side of the room might say, oh my gosh, she has a mole like me, whereas this side of the room doesn't see that. And so each one of us telling our story from our perspective is going to be incredibly important. And being able to see it is, if you can see it, then you can be it. If I can throw that out there again, is so powerful. My niece and nephew, so I recently graduated from my astronaut training, and so my niece and nephew love space. They always want to do science with me. And when you ask them, they'll both say, oh yeah, I'm going to be an astronaut. So they say that my auntie's an astronaut and I can be an astronaut. They don't have any narrative around that they can't do it because they grew up watching it, they grew up seeing it. And so when we look at Miss Marvel and people growing up seeing it, growing up watching it, that narrative of I can't do it won't even be there because they will automatically see it in the stories that are told around them. So I think that's why it's so powerful we tell these stories, because at a certain point, people will say, what do you mean that's not an option? Because they will have seen it and heard it and be able to live that.
And I'd like to share, agree completely, but just to actually see it. So I went to school in Wisconsin, and so with the nonprofit, with Novo Foundation, what we do is we try to teach kids how to code. So what we did is all of you probably are familiar with Ashley Furniture. That is based in Arcadia, Wisconsin. So kids in Arcadia, Wisconsin are predominantly Latino, low-income, Title I schools, highly marginalized. And so what we did is okay, if I'm going to do something in Wisconsin, how can I make it work? So we brought kids from Arcadia, about 100 students, middle schoolers, to come to the University of Wisconsin where I went to school. And so they're like, it's 3 hours, I don't want to go, this, that, why do I have to get up in the morning? And I'm like, okay, you get there and you try to motivate them. I'm like, so I share my story, I work in tech, I do this, I work at Microsoft, so I was like, you can work at Microsoft too, and all this stuff. And then we teach them how to code, and they were so reluctant because I never seen anybody in their community what even code means. What does that mean to be a software engineer? What does it mean to work at a good job where you have 401k and things like that? They've never seen it. So one of the questions I asked is what's your dream job? And so they raised their hand. First student, first girl, I want to work for Ashley Furniture in the factory line. Second girl, I want to do the same. Third girl, and so on and so on and so on. And I asked, that's awesome that you all want to work there, but why? He's like, well, because my mom works there, because my cousin works there, because my neighbor works there, because all the kids in my school, that's the big job that we can have in town. And I said, how about if you go to school, you learn how to code, and you program the next factory line? Can I do that? Right? Because I haven't seen it. So I'm happy to say that was 4 years ago. Those kids are graduating from high school, and they're going to go to university. Not all of them, but a lot of them, because of one day that made a difference where they see someone.
Jasmine, you do a lot of content creation specifically around comics and highlighting Middle Eastern and Muslim identities. Do you want to talk about that as a form of storytelling, especially on social media with such a wide audience?
So it's incredibly important, I think, after Miss Marvel felt very validating. I'm in my mid-30s, and for me to say that, I can't imagine the impact it's going to have on the newer generations. One thing that's really important is growing up in a world that doesn't really recognize you or sees you as other, is having media as a positive form of representation, so that when you do speak of your experiences, people could find something like Miss Marvel for reference. So one big event for Muslims is the holy month of Ramadan, where they fast for 30 days. And if anyone here knows a Muslim, you know of this month, And the famous quote, not even water. No, we can't even have water or food as long as the sun's up. And they touch upon that in Miss Marvel. And I can't tell you how many times I've explained this holiday in my lifetime. And I'm born and raised Los Angeles, California, but my parents are refugees from Iraq. And for people to finally understand what that is, to finally not ask me any questions, which is fine that you do, but the fact that I'm not other, it's not, in a sense, exotic, right? It's now part of a norm, and now there's holidays that we have, which is Eid. It's like a 3-day Christmas after Ramadan. And they touch upon that in Ms. Marvel, and now we have states recognizing it. So Islam, even though it's a really big faith, our holidays aren't officially recognized in the United States. And so now there are states like New York officially recognizes it, and kids get to have time off to, you know, attend the mosque and have family time and go to these festivals just like you saw on the show. So to see that, I gotta be honest with you, I cried at every episode. Just, it felt good to see somebody like me on the screen finally, you know, even though she's, you know, half my age. She's, you know, and she's so young, but it's so inspiring, and it feels good to just be like, oh, if you want to know who I am, here is my story being amplified by Disney and Marvel.
Going off of that, everybody here has some type of like role model presence, either being an If Then ambassador, being a content creator, or being in the New Science exhibit. How does it feel to know that there's kids and teens looking at you and being like, I want to be like that person?
Intimidating.
Terrifying.
I don't know about anybody else, but I just do work, you know? I just want to be the person that I didn't have as a kid, and so it just makes sense logically to be like, I'm doing work, and I'm also like showing other Black kids that they can do this too. Like, I have done lots of nonprofit work, and I've done STEM demos, and you know, there was this one kid, most of the Black children, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, most of them just wanted to do basketball or football. And, you know, when I would do these STEM demos, they thought science was silly, and they thought it was for a white guy. And when I would tell them I'm a scientist, they would be like, well, you don't make enough money. And I would be like, I feel like I make pretty good money. And convince them that it's an opportunity for them to do it too. But then it feels intimidating because I feel like I can't, you know, step out of line or do whatever. But, you know, when we got these statues and our faces were planted across museums as part of this, you know, If Then a movement, I realized like kids kind of need to see that life's messy and that making mistakes is a part of being human, and I'm actually not perfect, and I want to keep showing that I am not perfect and that my life is a little bit chaotic and it's fun, and I forget breakfast and I spill coffee on my books and I get upset, and you know, I take my dog on a walk and I trip and I stub my toe, and all of those things are part of my days, and I want to tell that part of my life too, because they don't need me to be perfect, they just kind of need me to show up.
I have to agree, it's incredibly intimidating to even think about the idea that someone might look up to you. And I think this feeling probably doesn't go away that, you know, I'm still a kid, I'm looking up to the people around me, and looking up to folks like this, and it's just wild to me that, you know, we have this shared humanity where people resonate with your experiences, and I think through things like the New Science exhibit and just, you know, being out there on social media, I get pretty regular messages, and some of them are kind of in the expected line of somebody from my religious background or my cultural background seeing me and appreciating that I'm out there representing in some way. But some of them have been in kind of more nuanced, surprising ways. So people who don't share that aspect of my identity or background. I think of, you know, a specific person of Mexican background who reached out to me to let me know that having seen a picture of me wearing my Pride rainbow turban, it didn't allow them to necessarily come out to their family, but to just show that picture to their mom and have her smile and see a world, a future in which that might be a possibility. So it reminds me of some of the things that we've been talking about, that we have, you know, all these multiple identities, and narrative allows us to find this shared humanity, even if it's not in the most obvious ways.
Yeah, a lot of my storytelling happens anonymously on Reddit because, as I'm sure you can probably imagine, the reasons a lot of trans people don't want to be identified. So there's a lot of younger kids on there trying to figure out what to do with their lives, and I can't tell you the number of times that I've seen people talk about how they're worried about if they're going to be able to transition in college or in medical school. And that's one that comes up where people are like, there's no way that you can transition in medical school. There's no way that you could fit having surgery in medical school. And I have to be the random anonymous person who's like, yeah, actually you can. Yeah, and to be the first was pretty scary. I think that's one of the things that I hope to give to the younger generation is to not have to be as afraid of the repercussions, because, I mean, nobody knows when you're the first one, right? Like, I didn't know if I could pull this off. I didn't know if I could go to medical school and have my nose ring in, and I just kind of showed up and I was like, is it gonna work? Am I gonna get in trouble? And a friend of mine refers to this as ideological squatting, because technically you're not supposed to, but the longer I do it, the more I'm like, well, you haven't said anything for the last 7 years, so I don't know. It's just a part of me, you know. And I think that's it's important for people to be able to look ahead and see that they're not going to have to necessarily give up the things that are important to them, or they're not going to have to postpone things that are important to their lives just because they're in school, or just because they want to pursue higher education, that all these other life things can and do happen at the same time. And I have a lot of colleagues who have kids too, and that's another one that it's really tough, but it's possible. And I'm happy that people are open about it, because it does happen.
It makes me really happy and excited, because there was nobody like me growing up, and being that person for people is inspiring. It keeps me going, right? So sometimes I feel silly, especially, cosplaying. As you get a bit older, you're a lot more tired, and you're like, why am I doing this to myself? And this is my weekend. These are my 2 days off from my job, and you come back to Monday beat up, and it's worth it, because it is, it's soul fulfilling, especially giving back, right? Making a difference while you're here on this planet.
Does anyone want to add anything else before we move on to audience questions?
I think I was just going to add to how storytelling is not just about generating a spark in every individual person, but it's also about seizing existing narratives and really changing how communities perceive marginalized folks. So while preparing for this panel, actually, I came across this incident where apparently in San Francisco there was a lot of Islamophobic paraphernalia and posters that were being posted everywhere in public spaces. And the amazing thing about this story, it has a happy ending, is that somebody anonymously started painting over these posters with pictures of Miss Marvel. They were printing Miss Marvel and putting her in front of all of these Islamophobic hate posters and saying, no, there are people in this community who are going to stand up against you, and Miss Marvel is the brown woman that we want to see. The Muslim person is a hero. So when you're faced with all of these video games where generally, traditionally, brown folks, Muslim folks are posited as the terrorist or the bad person, Miss Marvel comes in and she really saves the day for people. She saves the day for people that look like us, but she also saves the day for the entire community, because we start changing the narrative. We start looking at everyone from a different perspective. And when I saw that story, I was just like, wow, this is big. This is amazing. So I love this kind of visibility, and I like this kind of representation, because it changes us all for the better as a community.
also add is that it's important to see yourself represented, but also let's not discard the part that doesn't look like you. For example, in my career, the best manager I've ever had was a white lady from Philadelphia. Absolutely nothing in common besides her name was Anita and I could pronounce it. So that's about it. But she's the one that helped me, right? There were no other Latinos that I could, again, I work at Microsoft, right? Tech, big tech corporation, all that. And it was hard, but she's the one that helped me. And so regardless of your color, I think that you all can help somebody else, because when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I just want to dwell on what Chanta said. Diversity is one part, but inclusion is another one that it's oftentimes overlooked, and we can't. And then throughout my career, I only have 2 mentors that are Latinx, but the rest of them are all colors and all genders. So all that to say, it's important to see yourself represented. I'm not discarding that, but at the same time, we have to bring all of us together, and that's only going to work if we bring the other side that doesn't look like you to know your story and get to know each other.
Audience questions, raise your hand. Yeah.
My father was actually, her family was in Calcutta when everything split, and my children had never seen anything like that. I mean, I barely know the story, but my father didn't want to talk about it. Also, my mother actually also comes from the Armenian Holocaust. So there were all these like real patterns. One thing that really shocked me, Marvel, was showing that moment of that in an immigrant's life where they have to leave, and just kind of, hopefully getting people to understand that when people immigrate for all different kinds of reasons, not just because they want to be in the United States, but because they have to leave, and my parents had to leave. So I think you were talking a little about, the salvation aspect of getting through something like that and finding yourself again in the community. I'd like to hear what you would say about that.
I'll start. When you were speaking, thank you so much for your question. When you were speaking, it made me think of when we have Black History Month, and a lot of the movies and things that are shown are often shown stories of trauma. And that is absolutely a part of our story and many other brown cultures. And there's lots of fun stuff to show. So I think, when we think about reclaiming our story, it involves claiming that part of us that is joyful and excited. And, when I've participated in protests around police brutality, I love the times when we're singing. Like we're all just marching in the streets and we sing and it is fun. And that, that part isn't often shown. It's usually the violence and lots of things on the news about, BLM protests. But I think reclaiming that joy really comes from community, family, friends, and finding moments of joy in that pain and sort of rebuilding that and folding it in parts of your life that is often not seen. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say most about that is it's not always like stories of trauma. There's always, moments for smiles and laughs and food and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to add that the partition of India and Pakistan was largely a line that was drawn by colonial predecessors. This is something that even now, when we see fundamentalist political parties coming to rise in some of these countries, we forget. We forget that we had shared history. We shared houses. We shared kitchens. We married amongst each other. We grew up together. When I started meeting more and more South Asian folks when I was in grad school and now amongst my friends groups, I realized that there was a little bit of a divide amongst Indians and Hindus and Muslims from Pakistan and other nations, Bangladesh. But here in this alternate space where we're taken away from that and we have the histories with us, we are allowed to reinvent how we communicate with each other. We can really analyze what really happened at partition, and we can choose not to be partitioned here. So I've seen so many people connecting regardless of our religious background. We bond over food. For example, is Hyderabadi biryani the best biryani, or is Lucknowi biryani better? Of course, we fight over that, but we are always cooking together. And I think that joy, as opposed to trauma, that's how we reinvent ourselves here. So I totally agree with you on that.
I'll just quickly endorse that too. I think there's lots to talk about with partition. But, with Miss Marvel seeing this family from Pakistan, whereas, my family is from India, although before partition, they were in Pakistan, it really kind of highlights the way that this line was really arbitrary. And seeing the show, seeing the food, seeing the cultural dynamics, hearing the music, and really just feeling that warmth, that feeling of home, even though that's not where I grew up, really hit home for me. And, even just having them talk about partition and this aspect of history that people don't really know about, it was really kind of illuminating.
Next question. Yeah.
Yeah, something Chris said really resonated with me was the importance about not having to be the first at something. I'm an old scientist, I've been first at a lot of things. You smash your nose against a lot of bare bones. Tearing them down for other people, that's good.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. It is exhausting. It seems like one thing after another in a lot of ways. But I write my own story. Actually, this is something I was thinking of earlier. In my storytelling, I found the medium that works the best for me is writing. And in part, I want to give the information to people coming after me about, you don't have to be the first one. Here's how you do it. Here's step one. Go talk to this person. And it's a very long story. It's longer than I can really remember in any one sitting, which I think is why it's important to have a medium where it's recorded. And it spans over years, right? But it's also an honor to my own past to have gone through that. That's, I think, part of the importance of storytelling is to say, I want this to be recorded because I am the only person who will really understand this story. So as long as it's in writing, at least it's real.
Another question? Yeah.
Hi, I'm a Spanish teacher for high schoolers, and I kind of have some things integrated into my curriculum around diversity and acceptance and inclusion, but I've never really figured out a way to encourage certain students to go for it with STEM education because I'm teaching Spanish. Does anyone have any ideas or suggestions to how I can encourage that passion that some of them might have?
I'll give you my information and we'll change that in your school. Pretty much if there's any other teachers, so what we do with the nonprofit, with Nuevo Foundation, is how do we bring role models that look from all colors, and not only from tech, but also from marketing, from HR, from different paths, and share the story, and then we can also do some coding classes, all for free, unless it's a private school. But anything that's public school, especially Title I's and all that, more than happy to contribute to your school virtually. Yeah.
There are some nonprofits as well. I used to be a teacher, so I used to work for a nonprofit called STAR, and they would bring those, so it's more Los Angeles based. I'm not sure if you're from San Diego. Northern California, yeah. So there are other programs that they can refer you to as well. They're in those areas, and they bring teachers that have specialties in whatever, maybe whether it's coding, science, all sorts of different things, animals. And so they will bring those teachers, and they'll teach your class for you for just an hour in a month or however the school wants to plan it. And like I said, it's nonprofit, so definitely look into that.
And I know, as Bea said, sometimes you just don't know that there's an option out there. So even letting folks know that this is a career path for you, and here's how you can incorporate Spanish, and this is why that's important. Just creating all of these ideas that maybe you already see, that some child with a different experience in a different home doesn't see. Just being open with that, I think, is huge.
Or I just thought about coding in Spanish could be cool too. We have that too. So, the same thing.
We have time for one, maybe two more questions. Yeah.
Hi, I had a question about earlier when you said you don't need to be perfect, you just need to show up. And being representative of your culture, and people always look at you and you screw up a little bit, and they're like, yeah, all black people like this, all Chinese people are like this, and I just want to know how do you combat that, and how do you sort of balance it out?
Yeah, thank you for that question. How do I combat that? It really is just being me. You know, there are people in this world that are never going to change their mind, and those are the people that you choose not to engage with. I think, you know, for your own sake, it's really important to take a step back. I'm actually on a mental health leave right now. Like, I have worked in an industry that is tiring, and capitalism has driven me to work a lot. I also worked for a company that helped with vaccines during the pandemic. And so I have been grinding, and it's been really exhausting. And so I'm taking a space to just breathe. And it's been really, really good. And it also recenters me back to my joy so that I can come back and maybe combat more. You know, I'm just not in a space to constantly be arguing with people and saying, like, this is part of who I am and they're not accepting it. That's okay. You know, maybe after this time and I recharge, I can come back and be stronger. I think other ways to combat it is, again, to remember that you're not alone. There are other people who can do that for you. And I think what Bea was saying too is that, like, it doesn't have to be you, and it doesn't have to be the people in your community, because we're kind of tired. But it could be, you know, that ally that, you know, in my case is non-black. It could be a person of color. It could be a white person that I trust them to stand up for me. And when I'm in meeting situations, like, I can make eye contact with them and kind of raise my eyebrow, and they'll be like, yeah, so as Shantae was saying before Jim interrupted, it's necessary. Like, we need those allies to be able to speak up for us when we're tired, when we can't, you know, those microaggressions, they're heavy and they hit you all day. And so it's so nice to be able to have somebody to speak up for you. You know, I was in a recent situation where a white person was asking how to be a better white man. Classic question. We all laugh, but it happens. And I was in a room full of other BIPOC people, and immediately somebody's like, I really don't think you should be asking that question here. And it was so nice to be like, oh, I don't have to explain this. Also, just plug, like, you should ask ChatGPT. Just go ahead and go to ChatGPT and say, what should I do as a white man? It will give you a pretty okay answer. So.
I think we also have to take the time to acknowledge that it's not our responsibility to teach everyone everything. I cannot represent all African American women across the world. I just can't. I can tell you from my perspective, and sometimes that's valuable, but not everyone's going to operate the same way that you do or want the same things. My boundaries look different than other people that are even in my community. So it's not always, you can't always take on the responsibility. I love the ChatGPT. I usually say, feel free to Google. Like, it has a lot of information, and I'm very open to telling you exactly what to Google. Google crochet braids, and then YouTube will show you how to do that. And so, like, my team knows, it has seen me. A big part of Black culture is you change your hair a lot. I changed my hair a lot at work. I waited until I was a manager because I was like, I don't want to get fired. I was scared. But I change it all the time. And someone came down the aisle, and they're like, oh, Sydney, I love your new hairstyle. I was like, thank you. And they're like, is it yours? My whole team said, oh, you asked for that. That's unacceptable. And I was like, it's okay, everyone. It's okay. And I was like, if you Google this, you can learn more about this hairstyle. And that's the end of the conversation. To your point of allies, it's wonderful as you start building your community, not just with people who look like you, but with everyone around you, because they can come in and they can support you. And the great thing about having so many diverse people with so many different experiences is now we're having conversations we've never had before. And that's how you push the needle forward, is not just the same people having the same conversation, but people joining in that narrative, joining in that conversation. Now they can share it from their perspective, and really that's how we change not just the world, but the galaxy.
All right. And that's going to be it. We have to wrap up. Thank you so much to all of the panelists. Be shy.